and welcome everyone to this third online session of the Sustainable Living Leadership Program. We're very happy that you can join us today. We have exciting things prepared for you, and we hope that you will enjoy the session as much as you have enjoyed the last ones. We start this meeting with a spiritual opening that our dear friend Irene Woodard has prepared for us.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm just back from the Global Climate Action Summit, where I experienced both fear and fearlessness. And when I came home, I returned to a text that has always been helpful to me, which is Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior, How to Be a Warrior. And this is 2 paragraphs from there that have always resonated for me and hopefully will be helpful to you too. The principle of meditative awareness also gives you a good seat on this earth. When you take your seat on the earth properly, you do not need witnesses to confirm your validity. In the traditional story of the Buddha, when he attained enlightenment, someone asked him, "How do we know that you're enlightened?" He said, "Earth is my witness." He touched the earth with his hand, which is known as the earth-touching mudra, or gesture. This is the same concept as holding your seat in the saddle. You are completely grounded in reality. Someone may say, "How do I know that you're not overreacting to situations?" You can simply say, "My posture in the saddle speaks for itself." At this point, you begin to experience the fundamental notion of fearlessness. You're willing to be awake in whatever situation may present itself to you. And you feel that you can take command of your life altogether because you're not on the side of either success or failure. Success and failure are your journey. Of course, you may still experience fear within the context of fearlessness. There may be times in your journey when you are so petrified that you vibrate in the saddle from your teeth to your hands to your legs. You are hardly sitting on the horse. You are practically levitating with fear. But even that is regarded as an expression of fearlessness if you have the fundamental connection with the earth of your basic goodness. So here we go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irene. Today we're actually at the halftime of our online course. Today we have already had an online session on why it matters, the impacts of sustainable living, joyful changes, the psychology of changing individual behaviors, and today we are talking about narratives of transformation, communicating sustainable living. After this, we'll have one more online session with a thematic focus. That's in 2 weeks. We're then excited to see many of the learnings put into practice during the local event in the week of Living the Change. And we'll have our last online gathering, which will be the evaluation and certificate ceremony. Just to giving you an overview of where we are. I'm very happy to introduce the team of today. We're rotating, we're a big team, so I'm very pleased to introduce Reverend Neddy Astudillo, who's joining us today from Florida. Hello, Neddy, can you say hello? Great, and we have Kristin Barker with us, joining in from Washington. Hello, Kristin.
Actually, I'm joining you from San Francisco, too, as part of the Global Climate Action Summit, and I'm still in California. So hello, everyone, it's good to be with you again.
Wonderful. And then we have 3 speakers today, and that's a premiere. And we also have a few more male speakers today than the previous session. So, but first of all, we have Jill Cubitt joining us from New York. Hi, Jill.
Hi, hello. Hey, everyone.
Great to have you. Then we have George Marshall joining us from Oxford, UK. Hi, George. Can you unmute yourself for a second? There you go.
I thought you muted me. Yes, hello.
Hi, George. Good to have you. And then we have Rob Cabrera joining us also from the UK. Welcome, Rob.
I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Then we have a distinguished team of troubleshooters. If you have technical problems and running this Zoom call, it's myself trying my best to keep everything in order. And then we have my dear colleague Nana Furman joining us from California, I guess. Hi, Nana.
Hi everyone.
And Nana is the co-founder of the Global Muslim Climate Network. Great, so we know who's joining today. I do have some technical tips for everyone joining for the first time, or maybe a little refresher for those joining for the second time. What you need for this session is a notebook or a sheet of paper or your iPad or something for personal reflections. We will be using the chat bar, and you can use it by typing a message to everyone, and that should be questions and messages to the whole team of participants and feedback to speakers. So we'll ask you at certain moments to put in your feedback in the chat bar to everyone. So that's what everyone will be able to read. And then if you need technical support, or if your audio doesn't work, anything goes wrong, please message Nana Furman. You'll find her in the list of attendees. So please write to Nana. We'll again work with breakout rooms today, 2 times. So you'll meet a new small group of 3 people in your breakout room. You'll be in the same team for the first and second breakout rooms. And what's important about this is that once we start the breakout groups, there will be a little pop-up window on your screen that says, join breakout room, please accept this invitation, otherwise you will not be able to join the session. Everything else goes automatically, but you need to do that one decision. And lastly, this meeting will be recorded, and we will share both the recording as well as the presentation that you will see today with everyone a few days after this call. So you can take notes for yourself, but you will also see everything in the recording and documentation that we share afterwards. Okay, good. So I think that's the moment to hand over to one of our facilitators for today. Kristen, your turn. Okay, Kristen should be back now. Kristen, can you hear us? Okay, Kristen, do you want to walk us through this session?
Sure, good. Yeah, like, isn't that great? My internet connection has been fine and it just dropped out completely. That was fun. Okay, well, again, really great to be with everyone. I'll try to hold my phone stable so y'all don't get seasick while I go through this, okay? So yeah, the purpose of today's session is to explore the challenges of communicating about sustainable living, and maybe specifically the role of framing the narratives that we give, in addition to how we meet across various frames of culture, of value sets, etc. So becoming familiar with those challenges, and then gaining insights into the spiritual, cultural dimensions of communicating about sustainable living, and finding our voice, respecting the voices of others, and doing this in the context of faith community. Next slide. So of course we know that this is hard. And so if you'll click again, there we go. Yeah, sustainability. In sustainability, we face structural, social, psychological forces that are immense. There's a reason that we got into the situation where we would be threatening on the scale that we are our only home. I wanted to point out here at the beginning some really helpful work that I have found from a climate psychologist, sociologist, researcher, Renee Lertzman, who talks about the myth of apathy. that to me is really interesting work. It basically says that we mistake inaction and disconnection on the part of others about climate change, even maybe denial, hardcore denial, that is that we interpret that as apathy, and that is a mistaken interpretation. Instead, what we're up against is anxiety, ambivalence, and an aspiration to contribute. Those are all operating in what looks like apathy. So the framing that we can provide around this, and that we can help others discover within themselves and their tradition, their relationship to their tradition, is one that connects. First of all, it has to be credible, one that is evocative of a wider story, a story of meaning, a framework, a conceptual framework that is in some way wide, that enables agency and nourishes that aspiration to contribute, situates the self in a story and nourishes that want to contribute and belong. So the outcome, a skillful framing, an evoked framing, something that I think is, it's a matter of maybe our spiritual traditions to say that it is maybe present in all of these traditions. It's part of their mystical gifts. That at some level, I and my actions matter. That I am not alone. That I belong to a larger whole. And that there may be these other qualities that are helpful in that discovery of agency, of a nourishing of that aspiration to contribute, and that wide context. Things like truth and beauty and love. So that is to say, framing matters. The story we tell both constrains and opens up possibility. So for example, regarding climate change, we might say, just contrast these two, right? Humans are a curse upon the earth. She is shaking us off. What does that open up, and how does that constrain the possibility for our engagement? Alternatively, this crisis may usher in a widespread understanding of and response to what Dr. King called the inescapable network of our mutuality. Okay, very different framings that have very different opening and constraining of possibility. For sustainable choices, we might say, on the one hand, to be a good person, I should not be doing anything that burns fossil fuels. Alternatively, we could have a frame and a context that evokes something like, every choice in the direction of sustainability expresses my love for God. So very, very different dynamics are enabled by those two contrasting frameworks. Okay, so let's get into this. Let's see where we are. Let's take a baseline poll just to check with you on how, in comparison to other discussions you might lead, how comfortable do you feel facilitating discussions on climate change in your communities? So just choose one of those. And then if you would also, in the chat box, maybe post there 1 or 2 words that describe what you think are the most challenging aspects for you. Just a couple of words so that we can all see that we're wrestling this together. There might be some real differences, some unique elements, and there might be some overlap.
So I invite you all to take the poll. That should be a pop-up window to answer that question. We have 75% voted already. And I will then open the poll and we invite your comments in the chat bar. And if you share a comment in the chat bar, please send to everyone, not to me only, but to everyone. It's a little blue icon where you can choose that. Okay. You should be able to now see the results. Is that correct?
Did you do a show results?
I did, and I hope, oh yes,
Yeah.
wait, I need to click one more thing. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
There you can all see it.
Great.
Okay, and it seems some cannot send to all. Very sorry for that. Okay, oof. Let me fix this. Meanwhile, please send your comments to me and we'll fix that for the next round.
Yeah, good.
Thank you, but I can read out a few comments that came in. Heather says political ideology. David says striving towards thriving. Jeff says managing my judgment and anger at perceived apathy. William, skeptics and deniers get me ire up. Mark, 3 areas are very broad, how to get to specifics that can be discussed. Gary, underserved, marginalized populations don't see it as a priority. Steve?
Great.
Congregants' refusal to question capitalist relations. Few answers, thank you.
Good. Well, thank you everyone for participating in that. And I'll hand off now to my colleague, Nettie. Nettie, it's always good to be with you.
Good morning, buenos dias. It's great to be with all of you. It's a pleasure. And introduce at this point the next part of our webinar on narratives of transformation, communicating sustainable living. But before we allowed our presenters to share their wisdom, there are a couple of questions for ourselves in order to connect with our own stories in regards to communicating sustainable living. And I want to invite you to write your answers on a piece of paper or on a personal document, and you'll have a chance to share these with your smaller groups also later during this webinar. So the questions that we had for you at the table were, consider a personal experience with communicating about sustainable living. What was easy? What was difficult? Did you make use of your own story, your own experiences, or an aspect of your faith to relay that message? What worked and what did not work? So let's take 2 minutes to write our answers on a piece of paper. We have 1 more minute. Well, thank you everybody for taking this time to begin reflection from our own stories on these narratives. I want to now have an opportunity to welcome Jill Cubitt, whom, as Kristen said, will share with us about her work with letters for the future. Dear Tomorrow. To me, it is interesting that in this exercise of speaking to the future, to our loved ones in the future, to Earth in the future, we are challenged and invited to become aware of our present, our reality, our love, our hopes, our values. It is not a disengagement with today, but a way to root and engage ourselves even more with our world and our time. So Jill, as an introduction to your sharing, we wanted to also lay some questions on the table that we hope you will be able to answer. In your experience, how transformative have you seen these narratives to be for the people engaging in writing their Dear Tomorrow letters? And how can these letters writing open communication about sustainable living in the communities that engage with it? If you have examples, that would be wonderful. So thank you for being with us. And now I would like to give a chance for Jill to share with us this morning.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And I will try and incorporate the questions that you're asking into my presentation. And then if I don't get to them, I will hopefully get to them at the end. I did want to start with my own kind of personal story because I do think storytelling and thinking about our own personal why is very important. And so my story is that I have worked on the climate movement for almost a decade before kind of coming to this realization that we were spending a lot of time talking about climate change in a kind of from our heads. A lot of the communication work I had done was, using data and using scientific fact and communicating in a kind of a very traditional way. And it wasn't until I had my own child that I really started thinking about it instead of on like an intellectual level, that I started thinking about it on a much more kind of personal, spiritual, emotional level. And so I had this shift in thinking about, thinking through the lens of my own child's life helped me kind of change the ideas I had around the urgency and the time frame, and helped me reshape my communications from kind of very much in my head to what was in my heart. And so I co-founded a project a little over 3 years ago, which asks people to make promises to the future about what they're doing now, what actions they're taking now. And I share this with you because this is my why. This is what drives me and keeps me motivated. Thinking about what kind of future we're creating for our own children. As we are all thinking about our own personal narratives, I think turning to our why and what drives us, what motivates us, is really important and powerful as we move through this work. Next slide. So our project is a Letters to the Future project called Dear Tomorrow. It is a legacy-based project. It asks people to stand in the future and think of a person they care about, your child or your grandchild. If you're a young person, it's yourself in the future, and having a conversation between kind of what's happening in the future and what we're actually doing now. And so if you could imagine someone you care deeply about standing, 30 years in the future and asking you, what did you do to ensure that I had a safe and healthy place to live and a secure future? And that is the conversation in the way that we want to kind of bridge a gap that many people feel, even though we know that communities are impacted now. We also know that on our day-to-day lives, many people don't think about these issues. And so we want to find a way to connect kind of the actions that we're taking now with reducing the worst consequences. And so we're trying to have this kind of conversation with the future. And so we use, we do use this legacy frame. We know it's powerful for parents and grandparents. We know it's also powerful for young people. But the most important thing I want to just mention is in the whatever framing or narrative work that we are starting, not only with, if it's legacy, that might be the framing that's interesting for you, or as role of parent. But the most important thing is really to connect with the values that people have and the things that people care really deeply about, their communities, their jobs, how they put food on the table, their families, their faith communities, their faith. So connecting with what people hold, kind of most dear. And I hope George and Rob will speak more to kind of what they have learned about the values and the narratives that work, that resonate within the faith community. Go to the next slide. And so in our project, people either write letters or they submit photos or videos about their promises to take action now. And I don't want you to spend time reading this letter, but this is an example of a short letter. It was originally submitted in Spanish. We have it published in Spanish and English on our website. The point I want to make here is that there is not only this legacy framework, but there's this deep process and there's this deep thinking to our letters. And I am a proponent of this much more deep engagement. I think it's a lot of practitioners and research would acknowledge that a lot of the work that's been done to engage people has been easier. It's been shallower. We're not asking people to do kind of the complicated, the more difficult work. And so we see the process of reflection and then writing and making commitments as kind of more difficult, but also very important work. And what that kind of allows people to do is it allows them to clarify conflicts that they might have in their lives around these thoughts and their actions. And it's not all straightforward. It allows people to be more ambitious in their writing and kind of the vision of what they would like to see in the future. It helps people clarify and understand their why. Why are they committed to this? Why are they doing this work? And it actually also helps with follow through. If you take the time and you are thinking about it and you write it down and then you're sharing it with people, you're actually more likely to follow through. So I would really encourage people to kind of do kind of some of the deep narrative work that's really needed in order to move the conversations, but also to move ourselves. Next slide. I'm going to be very brief on this. We also have a much simpler exercise, which is asking people to write down one thing or two things that they are willing to do in their own lives now, and then to share them visually. And so we're really drawn to anything all these projects that are creative, that are engaging people, that are visual, that are storytelling. And these are just 3 examples of commitments that people have made, and then they've gone to share them with their communities or through social media. The next slide. I've written down a couple of ideas that have come up from people of how they have shared their stories in their own community, and I'll leave you with that list for you to think about how, if your community is one that has a sharing culture, there are many different ways that stories can be shared. I did want to more emphasize there are 2 points on sharing. The first is that you are a trusted person within your own community. And when you articulate your values and you can articulate what you care about, and you use your own language in the framing that means the most to you, you're more likely to influence the people that people in your faith community, people in your family, people in your friends, people in your neighborhood. So instead of us thinking about what is the right message and what is the right, I have to get it perfect, really thinking about, if we write it from our heart and we write a really honest, kind of authentic message, that connects and helps to resonate. The second thing I want to say is by sharing and by standing up and saying, hey, I'm actually taking these actions and I'm doing them, and by making them either a story or sharing them visually, you are starting to shift the norms that we have around what is acceptable and what is normal behavior. And you know, we are social creatures. We are really influenced by what our friends do, what our family does, what our community does. And so by saying, this is something that I care about and these are the actions that I'm taking, you're sharing that and influencing others. And the last slide I want to leave you with, I just wanted to read, I think it's the best way to get a sense of the project is actually read the letters and to understand what people are talking about. You know, people talk about what they care deeply. They talk about their fears that they have for the future. They talk about the vision that they want to have, a more positive vision. They talk about the actions they're taking. There is no one message. We allow for all messages, but we do find really compelling messages are ones that weave a story together and have different kind of complex ideas and put them together. So I'm going to read you part of a letter from a scientist. His name is Josh. And the reason I want to read it is I just really want to emphasize that the way that we learn and the way that we remember things are through stories. And this is just in our own communication. If we can use stories and if we can share stories, you know, we feel like we can spread the word, and the information will be more absorbed into the community. And he says, he writes a letter to his 2 children. He writes, "Dear Finn and Sai, I can see you living in a city with buildings topped with solar panels, sided with green living walls. You'll ride electric trains and shuttles to work, ride bikes and electric scooters to run errands. Your power will come from solar, wind, and hydro. You'll eat locally grown food, mostly plants. Your air will be cleaner, your city's quieter, people will be healthier. I do hope this is your world. The alternative is too hard to imagine. Yours, Dad." So I'm going to end there, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion on narrative building.
Thank you very much, Jill. Beautiful. And just as myself, maybe if you all have questions or thoughts later on that you want to ask Jill, make sure you start writing those down so we will have them by the end of the webinar and have an opportunity to engage a little more on what Jill just shared with us. So thank you so much. Now I have the pleasure to introduce George Marshall, who will be talking to us about communicating sustainable living in faith communities. Welcome, George. I met George during the launching of the Sustainable Living Initiative last year in Bonn, Germany, during the COP meetings, and it's great to be with you again, George, collaborating again for this wonderful community.
Thank you, Nettie. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly, yes.
Great. I'm going to keep 1 minute. I'm just going to keep an eye on my time so that...
And I will make sure to tell you along the way, so don't worry. I will give you a couple 2 minutes warning.
I'm sure you will.
You don't have to worry. I'll give you 2 minute warning. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's lovely to participate in this. It looks like my screen gets stretched as we go through this.
So before I give you the chance to speak, George, just let me finish here for a second. So as we ponder how to communicate sustainable living in faith communities, we also wanted to leave a couple of questions on the table for you, George.
Okay.
And ask you, what are the most surprising and challenging findings in your research on communicating sustainable living in faith communities? And if you could describe which of these faith communities that you have worked with, how broad do you expect your findings might also be applied to other communities? And last, and how can we position sustainable living as an embodiment of our faith values based on your research and experience? So thank you. Now I'll give you the microphone fully. Thank you.
Thank you. So these are these are great questions, but these are very big questions. The one I'm really going to focus on is I'm going to try and pull out that first one, which is just to try and bring out a few a few, sorry a second, I'm fiddling with my controls here. Oh, I see, if I click on it. A few things, a few key learnings from the research. Things which I hope that the people who are listening in on the webinar will find interesting and useful. I'm drawing on two pieces of work. The first is one that we did a while ago with Green Faith, which was research on how to talk about climate change. So we're building on that. And there you can see on the screen a link to that report. The things that we were hearing about before, especially from Jill, about narratives and stories and language, were in some ways we talked about in that report. I'm going to draw a little bit of that out, but I'm going to really try and focus right now on behavior. We looked at all of the research on the relationship between faith and pro-environmental behaviors. So those are all of the behaviors we're looking at the in the initiative. Although we looked at 30 studies, there is actually very little good research done on this, which is kind of interesting. It seems that nobody in the academic community has really gone and looked in detail at people of faith and the particular and special way that you can engage with these pro-environmental behaviors. So this is an important project you're working on. We did some work, we looked at the existing research, we ran some focus groups. Jewish people were not a focus group we managed to run, unfortunately. So my apologies to anybody of Jewish faith. But we did do a number, and we actually made sure that those included people from different countries. So we tried to get a fairly broad spread. I'll share what we learned anyway from this. But just to stress, I'm definitely not an expert in this. You are the experts, and I tried to pull that together. Hello. Again,
Yeah, we can hear you well.
No, you can hear me. I'm having a slight challenge here with the controls. Sorry about this, everybody. Oh, there we are. So here are 10 points I want to pull out. So it's 10 findings. There's 12. There we go. I'm going to pull out 12 things you can take away in your work, and I'm going to cover this ground quite fast. And I am sorry. I seem to be, Caroline, I seem to be having problems moving the slides on. Thank you. Maybe I'll just click on it and it happens. Okay, we know this already. What makes people of faith have a special connection with these issues is the faith. Of course, the communication starts with the faith. We know for any communication that the way we talk about something is that it belongs to them, that people have ownership. People need to look at these issues and say, yes, that's me. That's what I care about. That's what's important to me. I'm so sorry with this. I'm clicking on this and I don't seem to be getting the screen moving on. Is that my problem, Caroline, or is that something?
I don't know, George. I can just move the slides. That's all.
Shall
fine.
we just do that? I think that's the easiest thing. Let's just do that. And I'll just say slide. Is that all right? That means that one of the tests we have for communications and language is, for people of faith, is that it is going to be unlike any other language. And the reason I'm saying that is because there is a way that people in the environmental movement, which I'm a proud member of, who have worked on these issues before, think we should talk about lifestyle, behavior, environment, climate change. If it is effective, language which works for a faith community will not look like anything else. And for me, the measure of success of the initiative is it should be producing language and ways of thinking where I look at it and I go, wow, I've never seen anything like that before. I think that's the measure of the fact that we're speaking in the right way. Next slide, please. The reason that people want to take action is because they're doing it for their faith and because it is the right thing to do. Yeah? So it's not, keep clicking actually, Caroline. Okay, thank you. It's not about the polar bears. It's not about the, it's not about saving the planet. They're doing these things because that is fundamentally the right thing to do. We, in our focus groups, we asked the people in the groups 5 options for why we should change the way we live. You can see them there on the screen, right? All of these, or many of these, are the ways that people in environmental communications often speak. The one which came out strongest was because waste and greed are simply wrong. In other words, these kind of normal ways of talking are not appropriate. To say that it is simply wrong is not language you would use for the normal, for the let's say the broader agnostic, non-faith audiences. But it is the way that we need to talk. And this came through again and again and again. This is simply wrong. Slide, please. Oh. And back one, please. Thank you. That means it's important to say this is not about money. And the reason I'm saying that is because normal communications always talks about money. It's saying, hey, insulate your house and save money on your bills, or do this and save money. It's important to recognize people have limited money of what they can do, that not everybody has lots of money to spend, but we need to recognize that people do things for reason of faith. So the language is saying, do this because this is the way that you honor your faith, you honor your God, you honor your community. Next slide, please. Most people are not engaging very strongly with climate change as an issue. So when you are dealing with your own groups and you are going out and working with them, I think I would recommend that you start by finding out what people really, really care about. I think Kristen was talking about this as well. You reflect and you respond to the issues that are most important to people. And how do you know that? Because you ask them. We know for when we do research, most people are not that concerned or motivated around climate change. And therefore, climate change should be part of a conversation, but it should be kept to one side. Slide, please. It's very important not to judge or to blame bad behavior. We're all burning fossil fuels, and we are often doing it to care for other people. When we talked in our groups and when you talk in your place of worship with people, you will find that they immediately start having a defensive attitude. They'll say, well, I'm so sorry, but I had to fly to be with my brother, or I had to drive my car to do this, or to, I have to do this, I have to do that. Of course people do. So we're not going to judge or blame that behavior. We're going to praise the good behaviors, and we're all going to strive and work to do the best that we can. Next slide, please. Language which appears all the time is we should start from a position of gratitude, recognizing that we are so grateful for the wealth of the world and the privilege that that gives us. Of course, not all of us have the same amount of wealth, but nonetheless, starting from a position of gratitude for what we have. A lot of the language around environment is actually ungratitude, complaining about the world, complaining about capitalism or about business. These critiques are all fair, but the best position for communicating is to start saying thank you for what we have. Next slide, please.
2 minutes, George.
Thank you. Moderation is very important. The language which came through consistently from people of faith is that rather than saying, no, you can't do this, no, you can't have this, you have to stop doing this. Again, very much the language we normally get in communications. It's about saying, let's be moderate. Let's take what is necessary, but no more. So language of moderation is strong. Next slide, please. Being mindful of what we do. So again, rather than saying, no, don't do it, of saying, sometimes we have to do these things. Let's be aware that we are making a choice. Let's be aware of why we are making a choice. And I say here, for example, for flying. This is a very high polluting activity. When we fly, think of a choice we make. Have a discussion about it. Maybe pray about it for guidance. And if we make the flight, I'm going to be in North America next week. I went through this process myself. I will be sitting on that plane, thinking on the plane about what the plane is doing, thinking about my role in doing that. And I'm expressing gratitude for the fact that I have the freedom and opportunity to do that. This is part of a healthier narrative. Next slide, please. Connectedness. We already heard that from Kristen, for being part of a network of our mutuality. How this connects us to the people around us, and taking action connects us both to each other, our community, and the greater world. Next slide, please. I think language around environment, climate change, and lifestyles can help to build bridges. Within faith communities, people are quite fractured sometimes. This is a way of holding on to and bringing back in younger people. It's a way of speaking to shared values. And in particular, it is about bringing in people of different politics. The big problem we face, especially, I know many of you are from the US, a big problem that we face is that we are deeply divided along political lines. People of conservative politics are much less likely to believe in climate change or the reasons to take action on it, and pro-environmental behaviors. We have to be building bridges and reaching across to those people, and faith is a set of common values that allows us to do it. Next slide, please. To do so, we have to have messengers who are trusted. And one of the questions I want you to go away and think about is, for people I'm speaking to, who are going to be the messengers they trust? Is it going to be the preacher? Is it going to be the senior person in the church? Is it going to be somebody who prays alongside them? Is it going to be someone in their community? Is it going to be young people for young people, older people for older people, conservatives for conservatives, liberals for liberals? The question of who is the communicator is always more important, actually, than the message. So who will be the communicator? And we know, by the way, from our own research, and you can see this here, that politics is more powerful as a divisive thing in Britain and America, across many parts of the northern world, than faith. People of faith followed the rest of the world in their political division. So we have to speak across politics. Next slide, please. Thank you, Nelly. I'm only going to be 2 more minutes. One of the things which I found interesting in the research is we found that people did not respond to messaging about saying, making these changes is easy. Here are some easy small steps you can do. But actually people responded to language about, in terms of their faith and what they wanted to do, of that things are hard, are difficult. It was interesting that some of the Muslim people we spoke to would talk about how taking action was like a jihad even, but like it was a struggle. The best language will always be that this is challenging and difficult, but it's worthwhile because it brings us closer to our faith, our community, and our God, or gods. We have to be very careful if we make things easy, like say, hey, recycle, do this, but what people do is they transfer that to more polluting activities. So people, for example, say that they recycle so that they can fly more. We have to prevent that happening. And this kind of thing, which there was a lot of this about, especially 10 years ago, like pull out the plugs, easy, simple things you can do to save the planet, are very dangerous communications because actually they don't really make much difference, and they encourage people to go through small actions. So go for the big and challenging ones. Overall then, this is how it would wrap up. I was taking people on a personal journey, showing them that something can change them in the course of that journey, and that through a struggle, they can move forward. Okay, thank you. I'll stop for there. Actually, no, I don't. I have two more. Waste and health are things to waste and health are things to focus on. We know that this is language which cuts across all groups. We know from our wider research it cuts across different political groups, for example. Waste and health. Waste is a very strong one to go for, and actually probably might be a stronger one to go for than, say, climate change or environment, all these bigger things. Health also a strong motivator. And finally, sharing what you learn. So bringing people together and saying, hey, I can help you with this. I can show you how to insulate your house. For example, getting young people sharing what they learn. And one of the projects I was helping advise on here in Britain was with Muslim communities in a city close to me, where we were training young men to go and to insulate the houses of people in their mosque. So it was a way of giving young men an activity which made them feel they were really doing something strong, improving people's lives and sharing a message. So focus not just on the language, but also an activity that people can say, I can help you with that. Okay, I'm going to stop now.
Thank you very much, George. Thanks so much. Well, the great thing is that the follow-up after George is being able to talk about this with our group. So the invitation for all of us now would be to move into our breakout groups, and then we have a few questions here to help guide the conversation. How can you use the program and share values to build bridges with new people? And who would these people trust us as a communicator? So these are some of the questions for our breakout groups. Perhaps if something else was motivated by what we just heard from Jill and from George, feel free to do that as well. We have 10 minutes now then to break in smaller groups, and we'll come back to continue with this wonderful webinar. Thank you. Now we are going to continue with the next presentation. I'm going to allow Kristen to introduce our next presenter. And I want to remind you, in the meantime, you can start writing your questions in the chat box. So by the time we're done with the presentation piece of the webinar, we'll have those questions, be able to share those with the presenters, and you will be able to receive the answers you're looking for. So thank you so much again, and Kirsten, your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Nettie. It's my honor and privilege to introduce all of you who are not familiar with Rob Rabea and his work. Rob is a longtime teacher at the Gaia House in the UK, in the Devon area, which is a Dharma center in the Insight tradition. He's co-founder of something called Sangha Seva, which is an organization exploring the Dharma through an international service network. And he's also a co-initiator of dance, which is a great colleague of the organization that I'm a part of, One Earth Sangha. Dance is the Dharma Action Network for Climate Engagement. It's a really beautiful Buddhist-based response to the climate crisis, very artful and evocative. So he is joining our meeting today from the UK, and has been such a really profound teacher in my own practice. And so, you know, it's in part, I just want to say, quite selfish of me to have him along, just so that I get to have a little bit more time with Rob. So Rob, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to your lens on this discussion.
Thank you, Kristen. I want to check, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Let's see, I have 10 minutes. So I actually wanted to see if it's possible to begin to open up two areas for consideration, for inquiry, that are both really huge, and if you like, kind of high level areas. And then thirdly, just say something about communication of what's opened up there. So these two huge areas are, I think, often kind of partially closed off to us. We can't really see deeply, we can't move very well or openly in those areas in the wider contemporary culture, and sometimes also in our faith cultures. So big areas, and hopefully try and be brief, so just skimming through. And the first might be might strike you as a kind of strange question just because it sounds so big. But the question is, what is nature? What is the earth? What, for that matter, is matter? So when we're, one of the ways of caring about the climate is through caring about nature, about the earth. That's what we're involved in here. But often when we approach the challenges of climate change, or thinking about climate change, or just the degradation of the environment, or these choices and challenges, sacrifices perhaps we're asked to make, or in our lives, we approach it with a little bit of a kind of indoctrinated view, or a limited view, or maybe even a confused view, not always, but sometimes, of why we care, or why we make certain choices, or really of what nature is. So partly, of course, in caring about climate change and trying to address it, we're caring for human beings. But there's a whole other aspect, or other half of it, is what is nature? And of course, most of us grew up in and are saturated by a dominant culture, which we could say is scientific materialist. It views nature as in a certain way. It's brute matter, purposeless, doesn't have any depth to it. It's a sort of flat, meaningless world of matter, although some of it in humans and in animals is conscious, and admittedly it's beautiful, etc. And there's this scientific materialist view, and there's also the view of science as the technological view, so that the relationship with nature is often, though we appreciate it, enjoy it, and use it, we have a kind of power. We exercise a power over it, and that's very much part of the view that's inculcated into us. And these kind of views kind of underpin our attempts to change our attitudes and our behaviors and our choices, etc. So really, we have nature is this, and there's a kind of single view of what nature is, of what the earth is, of what matter is. I don't want to say that that view is wrong, but we get shrunk into kind of one view, a single view, one option. It's the default view, and very easily the conversations kind of slide that way. So just the other day, some of you will know Polly Higgins. She's a lawyer, and she has a wonderful initiative to try and get ecocide, the destruction of ecosystems, to get the UN to agree that to be an international crime. Brilliant person and wonderful initiative. And I heard an interview between her and an interviewer who was very sympathetic to what she was doing. And very quickly, what I noticed was, despite this sympathy, the reasons they were giving for trying to make ecocide an international crime was that because ecosystems support us, because they support humanity, because we as human beings rely on nature, that actually wasn't exclusively the initial intention. So very easily for us, our vision and our ideas of what we're doing and what we're caring about and what nature is actually slips. So when we think about what we can draw on there in, the sort of classical one from, let's say, the New Testament in the Christian tradition, also the Old Testament, of course, is stewardship of the earth, or stewardship of nature. We're given dominion of, it says in Genesis. But what is this earth, and what is the nature? And in some of the spiritual traditions, we can draw on, or we can find whole other ideas, whole other visions, or actually open to a whole other senses of what this earth is. So that you get, for example, different teachings, often on the edge of faith traditions. The kingdom of heaven is here. This is it. If I can see it, if I can sense it, if I can open my senses to it. In the Islamic tradition, some of the writings of Henri Corbin, channeling that tradition, talked about the celestial earth, this earth here perceived in a different way, or the earth as an angel. In the Jewish tradition, they talk about tikkun olam, this healing of the world or redeeming of the world, and that's part of the work that a human being does through their behavior, but also through their very perception. Or redeeming the sparks is another. It's a Jewish Kabbalistic teaching about actually transforming our perception, our vision, our engagement with what appears to be unholy, and making it, opening ourselves to a sense of its holiness, redeeming the sparks, it's called. In Buddhism, there's a sense of the possibility that this very world is what's called a Buddha field, or that the Buddha nature is not something just inside me, but is actually the world itself. The earth and the beauty of nature is at Buddha nature. So I'm not just talking about simple ideas, I'm actually talking about transformations of perception that can be found if we look for them in oftentimes at the edges of our spiritual traditions. We can call on quite radical views and senses and ideas of what nature is, and what we're in, and what we're responding to, and what we're caring about. So one question I want to kind of put to you and invite you, if you want to explore at another time at home, because it's such a big question, is what can I draw on? What can you draw on in your tradition to support a view or an idea or a sense of the world, of nature, that justifies or asks of you whatever lifestyle changes you may be contemplating? And as touching on both what George and Jill were saying, we're talking now not just about small changes, about radical shifts. So we're talking about radical shifts of view, real challenges, something that the whole being wants to rise up and move into and open up for itself, turning everything upside down. So that would be a question one can take away, and really the possibility of very different views of the world and of nature. Before I get on to the main thing that I wanted to talk about, and we'll take into the groups, the second piece, I wanted to say about something about communication and the time we live in. Both George and Jill kind of touched on this, but let's say one begins to open and begins to practice and begins to be devoted to a different view of the world, a view of the holiness of the world, of the profound sacredness of the earth and of nature. It's not then that we're wanting to convince others of the truth of that view, or even of the necessity of that view. I believe it's probably more helpful just to bring it, as Jill was saying, just to normalize it, to bring it into the plurality and the diversity of what the wider culture then sees as allowable and available views, allowable and available senses of the world. Not to enforce it or to dominate, but just to bring it into the table so people can see, oh, that's available, that's okay, that's normal. So there are people who see that way and who sense the world that way and who are not limited to the dominant view. Okay, so that's one thing, and you can, if you like, take that. It's quite an investigation. The thing I really wanted to focus on is, so this first question we asked, what is nature? What is the earth? What is matter? We fall so easily into the default kind of view that we've been educated into. Can I ask a second question? What is a human being? So these are very big, as a high level or fundamental, radical question. What is a human being? maybe the answer to that is related to the question of what is nature, what is the earth. Maybe, as I said, a human being is, I could have a view, one could have a view, your view might be a human being is supposed to be a steward, or is supposed to be a participator in this redemption and this healing of the earth, and participation in that whole process of the healing of nature and the world through the perception, through the action, etc., through the being. Maybe a human being is a lover of the earth, of others, of God. But actually, I want to pull out something slightly different rather than something like that, and ask you a question. What is a human being? Or if I put it this way, what is your idea or image, you yourself, what is your idea or image of what humans can be or can move towards? In your humanity, what is it to be fully human? What is your image, your idea of a beautiful life, a noble life, the fulfillment of a human being as something that you can aspire towards and dedicate yourself towards? And as George was saying, not just little changes, but a radical, upside down revolution in your sense of what it means to be a human being and what is possible there. So this is, and if I just take one more piece out of that, we can, again, there's many approaches we could take to such a question. But if I take a classical word, classical in terms of Western culture, use this word virtues. So part of one way of thinking about what it means to live a beautiful life and what a human can be, can grow towards, is in terms of virtues. It's an old word, it's kind of gone out of fashion a little bit, but things like kindness, compassion, courage, the courage to do what goes against the grain, the courage to speak out, all kinds of courage, the courage to let go, to make sacrifices, generosity, steadfastness, honesty, self-awareness, dignity, renunciation, sacrifices I alluded to of this or that, sensitivity. There are many possible virtues. Openness and willingness to wrestle, as George was saying, or to take a flight. Am I really wrestling with that question? Am I engaging it? Capacity to stand independently from the dominant cultural views. All these, we could say, are examples of what I would call virtues. And one of the interesting things to me, both in relation to talking about moral questions and ethical questions, and climate change as a huge ethical question in a way, is that we often kind of lean towards efficacy, meaning what's going to help this? What's the best action? What's the most efficient action, for example, for getting people to reduce carbon dioxide or emissions, etc. Sometimes what gets eclipsed, both Jill and George talked about it, is this issue of virtues. So that both the question of efficacy, what will help, what actions, what choices, what communication will help, but also the question of humanity, if you like, and virtues, and both of them together come in as, if you like, two sides of a larger ethical question. And sometimes that side about virtues, that conversation about virtues, gets a little bit eclipsed. It's a little bit gone out of fashion. So I've given an extreme example, and some of you may know this. Some of you will have heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German theologian who lived and died during the Second World War. And the Nazis came to power in Germany in the 30s, and he remained completely outspoken in his views, criticizing the moral attitudes and behaviors of the Nazi regime. And he stayed that way all through the 30s and into the start of the Second World War. And he got hung for his troubles. He got hung and executed. Now we can look at such a such a behavior and say, well, it probably didn't make any difference. Its efficacy in terms of ending the Nazi regime, certainly in terms of ending the Second World War, was really, really limited. His outspokenness was never really going to change things, very unlikely. But we can ask in terms of virtue, and that side of the moral coin, was it when he chose and acted and spoke as he did then, even at the cost of his own life, and he wasn't naive, he knew that that would probably be one of the likely results. Was it, when we witness that, when we hear about that, is it beautiful? Is it noble? Is it brave? Is it inspiring? Does it become a model to be respected and honored and aspired to for those of us who want to live with such a moral compass that our faith traditions give us? So I don't want to replace the question of efficacy with virtue, not at all, not exclusively one nor the other, but just to kind of open up a bit more that side of the conversation. And it's a bit like what Joy said, we do it because it's the right thing to do. And part of that right thing to do is because that's what it means, or that's what it can mean to be a fully human being, a noble human being, a being who is living in the most, and aspiring to live and open in the most beautiful way that's possible for a human being to do. This question of virtues is part of what moves us and moves others. It speaks to others, as for example, Dietrich Bonhoeffer speaks to me and to others decades and decades later. So these are the kind of things I would like us to think about, if possible. And I think it's now time for the breakout group. Is that correct? Or rather for the personal reflection. Yes, personal reflection. So wherever you are now, here's a question. It's for yourself. So this is an individual question for you, for your life, for your relationship with God. Don't worry just now about how you're going to communicate that to others or what others should do. But as we do this, and you can see the question there on the screen, see if you can, just because what we want with these kind of questions is really to engage the whole being, as Jill was saying. It involves not just the intellect, but also the heart. And I would also say the instinct and the intuition and also the body. So wherever you are right now, if you can kind of support this question, this inquiry, just a couple of minutes, by just kind of making sure you're in a relaxed posture, but upright, because sometimes the body gives us the signals of what we love, of what we want to commit to, of what we're devoted to, of what we want to align our lives with. We actually feel that sometimes. Some people feel it in the body. So we get the signals in all kinds of ways. So if you would like to, if it's helpful, to adopt some kind of posture that's relaxed but open and upright, so that your whole being can engage in this question, your heart and your soul and your body. And you can see the question is for yourself. What is your idea or image of what humans can be or move towards? What is your idea or image of what it might be to be fully human, to live a beautiful life, a really profoundly beautiful life? So if you want to just see what comes when you drop that question into your being, what moves you, what touches you? Let yourself have the totality of your being, your determination, your love, your devotion, your body, your grit, your passion, your mind. In just the closing few moments, allowing yourself to connect. What does it need in relation to this? In relation to what you're devoted to? Okay, so in a minute we're going to have the breakout group. Let me just say, you can see now on the screen the two questions which I'd invite you in the breakout groups to share with each other. And perhaps you can take it in turns. But just a word here of encouragement and something that might help. When we talk in these terms about virtues, so you can see the question, which relevant virtues, in other words, the virtues that are relevant to these big steps that George was talking about, these real challenging renunciations or sacrifices or changes in one's everyday life, which virtues relevant to this jihad, this battle, this war, if you like, which relevant virtues move you and touch you? Now that's a different question than just which ones are going to be the most efficacious, the most efficient. Which ones speak to your heart? Which ones call your soul? Which ones are beautiful to you? And the second question, well, you see there, which do you feel are deeply beautiful and call you? I already said that. But what I want to throw in here is that very often when we talk about these kinds, this aspect of things, we can very easily start judging ourselves. Or measuring ourselves, oh, I'm nowhere near that, or I'll never will be, I'm not good enough, others are further along than I am. So take care with that. These are questions about the heart's commitment and alignment and devotion, the questions about beauty and your sense of beauty. So the more you can come at it from a sense of devotion and beauty, or with a sense of devotion and beauty, it's almost like the self-criticism, if it's going to be there, it doesn't really get so much of a hold. So that's one thing. And if you, when you share with each other, I wonder if it's possible, rather than just talking about it, to actually perhaps each take 3 minutes, if you're in groups of threes, and just 3 minutes to share without the others interrupting. But see, as you share, both the sharer and the listener, if it's possible to really go slowly. You don't need to talk all the time. And you might be like, well, I don't know. Well, okay, I don't know. So be with the not knowing. Take your time. Feel what you feel about these things. Feel, for example, if you're in touch with their power, how they touch you, in touch with your aspiration, your sense of commitment, devotion, your sense of beauty. So that's part of, can I talk and talk being in touch with that whole sense of my being and how I feel about these things, and actually perhaps communicate that as well. And the listeners too can endeavor to be listening as receptively as possible with the whole being and what touches them, and not critiquing, etc. So does that make sense? If we then take 3 minutes each, is that possible in a certain order around the three? I'm not sure how the
Thank you, that
technology.
sounds wonderful. And I'm going to start the breakout rooms now. You will be in the same groups.
We'd like to get some feedback. Just if you can chat, if you can type into the chat window, which one then we can share out as text. So you can read what others have written after you write, but take a moment to write just some things that emerged for you in the breakout group. We'll take just 1 minute here. Just share a little bit about what you noticed for yourself, what was invoked as you listen to others. And then we'll hear from our speakers again. Beautiful. Mark and Andrew and Amy, Dawn. So we'll just take 2 minutes each here for the presenters now to offer their final thoughts. And again, we'll be sharing what you offer in the chat window as follow-up from the session. So let's begin with you, Jill.
Sorry, I think I'm muted.
There you go. Yeah, you can hear me.
Okay, I'm okay. I mean, I think my biggest takeaway listening to the speakers and then reading through the group chats was how all of the thread for me that went through all of these was about doing deep work, asking big questions, not being afraid to make big changes, to have, you know, personal deep conversations with others. And so I think my kind of overall thoughts of how you do that is to take time to actually do this kind of work. And it can be personally difficult to have these conversations or write down your ideas and thoughts, but that I think that it's worth it. And it's very normal to, you know, what I've learned from reading letters and from talking to people, it's that many people do have conflicts and do care deeply. And it's okay to share that and to not be kind of perfect in your presentations, but to really speak from your heart and to work through some of these contradictions and new ideas and conflicts you might have. And so you know, my philosophy really is that we need to move slow in order to move fast. And so I'm just recommending people take the time to do kind of the deep work that's needed. And I just end by saying I'm available. I left my website and my email if anyone wants to contact me directly to do some of this legacy work or storytelling work in their own communities. I'm happy to work, you know, individually with people about doing this kind of work. So thank you so much. It was really amazing for me to be on this panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Janelle. George, final thought.
My final thought is I would really encourage people. It was something which came up in all of the conversations we've had. Not to think about magic words. We always say in our communications work, there are no magic words. There isn't a way that we talk to people of faith or even a way that we talk to people of a particular faith. What we have is a conversation which listens to who they are and what they care about, and then builds the conversation through that listening process. And so that's why I'd say I think the important thing is the process. It's the process of engaging with people and listening to them, and then building the conversation on who they are and what their needs are. The biggest mistake that people make in communications is going into an area, speaking from their values and their attitudes and how they see the world to other people, without ever taking the time to listen to who those people are. So I would, I would urge that. And already that's very clear in the way that you've been talking and everybody has been talking on this call. But the other thing I'd really leave you with, as I put it in my talk there, was this idea of building bridges. The reason I say it's so important to listen to who people are is because what really interests and energizes me in my work is going and trying to build bridges with people who are normally outside the conversation. So that's the other thing that I would say, is of using faith as a set of shared values, of life experience, of something that binds people together as a way of opening up conversations with people who are not normally part of that. And I think all of us, of course, we tend to stay within our own communities, and that includes communities of faith, politics, and class, education, all of those things. And I'd really urge you to use these huge problems we face as a way of reaching out to new audiences. And when you do that, then taking the time to listen to who they are and what they care about.
Oh, thank you, George. The co-benefits of climate conversation.
Yeah,
yeah, thank you. Wonderful. Rob, final thought.
Thanks. I'm not sure I have anything to really add at this point. I just want to say thank you and so much appreciation for the initiative that you guys are doing, and for Jill and George, and the fact that we can all come together in this way and be together and share. I think it's just wonderful. I think something I already said, but and again it's echoing something George said, but I think there's something speaks very loudly when there's a kind of when we engage a radical challenge, when we really bring that fullness of what we can aspire to, and even if we don't communicate that in words, it communicates to other people. So I would just, if possible, want to support and encourage this kind of totality of the being engaged in this direction. It's actually even bigger than just climate change. It's a whole kind of moral direction and spiritual direction of care. So that, don't shy away. I think what I would encourage, don't shy away from something that's so big that you can't even possibly reach it. It's always going to have that beyond. Don't shy away from what's utterly radical. I think that's one thought.
Wonderful. Great. Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think I can speak on behalf of the leadership team and everyone who's able to stay with us, and we're sorry that we have gone over here. Really appreciate your hanging in here. Thank you so much to the presenters, and I'll hand off to Nana, who's going to be talking about what's next.
All right, thank you, Christine, and thank you to speakers, Jill, Rob, and George. So our assignment for this session until the 1st of October is to plan and register your own sustainable living event for the week of Living the Change, which will happen on October 7th to 14th. So please get your information in the website, livingthechange.net/global week. And please collect and share delicious vegan recipe from around the world. And don't forget to join our next call for the organizer of this week of Living the Change on Wednesday, September 26th. Which is next week, 10 days from now, actually. So, and then you can see the timing here. So please make note of that, and please register for that and join us. And our next session is going to be 2 weeks from now on the topic of we can do this together, how to engage your own community, how to engage my community. So it's going to be on Monday, October 1st, and same time as we have today. So please don't forget to have that in your calendar. And that's it for me. So I'm going to invite Irene to close up with our spiritual reflection.
corny, and I love it. So that's what you're watching here, is that which I love and care about. And here's a short poem by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche called Goodbye and Welcome. Goodbye, welcome, glad to meet you. How do you do? All this I hear echoing in the cave of social meeting. And the echo goes on and on until it dies in the mountain depths. Powerless to reflect. But oh world, oh universe, my journey to the overseas continent needs no copyright, for it has never been conducted in the same manner. It is the fresh meeting of man, the true meeting of living man. It is the pilgrimage, the great odyssey which I have never feared, since I have not hesitated to flow with the river's current. With blessings and wisdom, I write this poem, as I am free once and for all, in the midst of friends who radiate true love. Love to you all. Thank you all for being here today. This has really been a special time for me, and I hope for you too. And love to you all, especially our guest speakers today. Thank you.